Teachers of Reddit. What is the most disturbing thing your student has ever done? I was a supervisor for a special program that involved about 20 students who had been expelled from other schools. Most of them were known gang members. The program had a strict no bandana policy. One day, Kid 1, male 16, stole Kid 2's, male 17, cigarettes while Kid 2 was in an office session about not doing his homework. We later found out that Kid 1 thought it was hilarious and was laughing about it. During break, Kid 2 went for his smokes and couldn't find them. He proceeded to flip out, screaming about how he was going to hurt someone. No one admitted to the theft. We de-escalated the situation and later took him to the store to buy a new pack. A few days later, Kid 1 was ratted out by another student who was in the same gang as Kid 2. We didn't know any of this was going on at the time. One afternoon, during a group session where the students sat in a circle instead of at desks, Kid 2 and another boy suddenly jumped up and yelled, "Yo, Kid 1!" as they ran at him and started beating him up right in front of everyone. The staff broke up the fight. All 3 students were expelled after that incident. I have no idea what happened to them afterward, although I can imagine some scenarios based on how committed they were to gang life. I used to teach a PE class to 3 to 5-year-olds. I had this one kid who used to come with his friend from kindergarten. His friend's mother apologized to me numerous times and said she never would have offered to bring him if she knew what he was like. More than once, I had to evacuate the rest of the kids from the gym because this 3-year-old would be running around screaming "fuck" and "cunt" at the top of his lungs while trying to punch, kick, or headbutt other kids. You never knew what would set him off. If you asked him to kick a ball, he was equally likely to kick another student or the ball. One time, he went so violent that I couldn't get him away from the other kids and ended up using the firm cuddle technique, which they definitely don't teach teachers about anymore. I basically dropped him to his knees with me on my knees behind him, arms wrapped around his arms and his chest. The only part he could move was his head, and he kept trying to smash the back of his head into my face. But the worst part was the laughter. He normally had a vague, empty look on his face, but when he was trying to hurt someone, he would scream with laughter, wearing the biggest shit-eating grin. I only had him for 10 sessions once a week, but holy fuck. I will never forget that kid. One of my high school students came in one day and handed me a pop vinyl figurine from one of her favorite bands. She said I could have it. I wasn't used to random gifts. I asked her why she was giving it to me. She replied that she didn't need it anymore. I thanked her and told her to have a good day. The following day, she unalived herself. It immediately became clear why she didn't need the figurine anymore. That still haunts me. In retrospect, I realize now that this act was a sign she was contemplating or preparing to unalive herself. But it didn't occur to me at the moment, and that haunts me. I hope she found peace. I taught college, primarily to seniors and graduate students. One day, I had to essentially sit with a disturbed student in my office and keep him talking while campus police searched his locker and workstation. The student had made threats against other students, but the other students waited to inform me until the situation had become quite severe. When I intervened, the student started threatening me, contacting me on my personal cell phone and email. My husband advised me to report this to campus police, which I did, but they initially said there was little they could do. The chair of my department couldn't even remove him from my class because he was enrolled through a different department, and his home department was slow to act. I arranged a meeting with him under the guise of talking things out while instructing my teaching assistant, TA, to search his belongings. My TA immediately called campus police, who accompanied him to search those areas. They found some items in his office, enough to expel him from school, but nothing that warranted criminal charges. That is, until he brandished a gun from his backpack. This occurred as he stepped out of my office while my TA and campus police were present. I watched as a campus cop literally tackled him off his feet. I used to teach at an alternative high school where many of my students were on probation from areas with significant gang violence or had issues related to being born drug addicted. I had a student with whom I had worked hard to build a good rapport. One Friday, he looked me in the eyes and told me, completely calmly, that I shouldn't come to work on Monday. He kept insisting that I shouldn't be there. When I finally pressed him for a reason, he told me that he was going to blow this place up. I responded, "You know I need to report this, right?" He told me to do what I had to do. He was arrested right out of my classroom, and I had to be interviewed by the police. It was honestly really traumatic. I ended up calling out on Monday, even though I knew nothing was going to happen because my anxiety went through the roof. I called out a lot after that and eventually found a new job. Despite everything, I still have a great deal of compassion for that student. I think about him often and hope he's okay. I worked in a nursery and had a little girl who needed one-on-one attention because of her serious attachment disorder. At that point, it wasn't diagnosed yet, and the nursery staff were totally unequipped and underfunded to deal with this poor child. She had just turned 3, had very underdeveloped speech, didn't know how to cry, and was the most violent child I had ever met. She was incredibly strong due to early trauma. Children from abusive homes often have more strength because they're constantly in fight or flight mode, high on adrenaline, and she was already removed from the abusive home and living with her alcoholic grandparents. I saw her swing a metal pole at a kid's head, stomp on children, shout obscenities, you name it. But the most disturbing behavior was her biting other children, specifically babies, on their faces. During outside playtime, we had to have someone right behind her at all times, especially when the babies were out with us. She would be sweetly playing in one corner, you'd look away, and then bam, she'd be on the other end of the playground, viciously attacking a baby. She had put one of those poor babies in the hospital before I started there, and there were many other incidents during my time as well. The good news is that after working with her for just a few months, giving her attention, love, and patience, she made significant progress. She learned how to cry, how to show love and frustration, and she stopped biting towards the end. It was really hard work, and I definitely got too emotionally involved, but it was worth every moment. It broke my heart when I had to leave. I teach 4-year-olds part-time, mainly focusing on art and recreation in the afternoons. There's a girl in my class, let's call her Mary, who is a tiny terror, frequently making other kids cry. Her actions are very calculated, pulling hair, kicking over toys, snatching art. She waits until the other child is crying before she stops. She never wants the toy, just the reaction. On the other hand, there's a boy, Jim, who is her polar opposite and often the voice of reason in my class. He's a gentle giant, the biggest kid in preschool. He shares happily, is kind during playtime, and is probably the most thoughtful person I've ever met. One day during outside time, Mary kept targeting Jim. He remained good-natured throughout, responding kindly when she snatched a shovel from him by saying, "It's okay, you can have it, toys are for sharing," and similar things. Sidebar: remember those giant red and yellow cars that kids sit in and pedal with their feet? The yard has 5 for the kids to share. Mary was leaning against a wall and Jim was pushing one of those cars. The kids like running around with them, so that was normal. Jim was probably a good 30 feet away from her when he suddenly started accelerating. He was aimed like a homing missile, pointing straight at clueless Mary. I genuinely believed he would turn away at the last minute or stop. I was wrong. He slammed the car right into Mary, effectively crunching her against the wall. I'll never forget how long it took for her to inhale. I was shaking, thinking he had cracked her ribs. Her entire back was bruised, but thankfully there was no further damage. I was too shocked to be angry. After passing Mary to my co-teacher, I turned to Jim, who was sulking in the corner, and asked, "Why did you do that?" He just shrugged and very calmly said, "I was just trying to take care of our problem." I'm 100% scared of this kid now. I had a 5th grader who I swore was sociopathic. His father had deported the boy's mother because he wanted a new wife, if that gives some context to the living situation. The boy would say very aggressive sexual things, moon students on the bus, etc. But the predatory behavior was the worst. He'd wait as students left the room so he could be next to last, turn off the light and backhand the last kid in line, often his own cousin, who was his most common victim. I had to keep an eye on him constantly. He'd also steal electronics and things from his friends, or force his cousin to do so in case they were caught. P.S. Yes, CPS was involved. This was almost a decade ago, so I'm not sure what happened to him. At the first school where I taught, a girl came up to me one day and said, "Robert has a knife." I pulled Robert into the hallway to talk with him about it. He said he didn't have a knife, but did have a box cutter. I asked him why he had it, and he said, "Because I'm tired of Chris." Chris was an annoying suck-up, but wasn't really bad or mean to other kids. I asked Robert what he was planning on doing to Chris. He said, "I'm going to get him in the bathroom." I usually took the class to the restroom after lunch, but I didn't that day because they were being rowdy in the hallway. I took Robert to the office, and after hearing the story, the principal chewed him out. She then called Robert's mom, and she chewed him out on the phone. Here's the kicker. Robert knew he was in serious trouble. He knew that what he was planning was wrong. He just didn't care. Not in a false, bravado, macho type of way. He literally didn't care. I hate to predict a kid's future criminal endeavors, but that kid scares me. By the way, Robert was 8 years old at the time. I'm a middle school English teacher. One day, I had a student pull a tooth out of his own head to get out of silent reading. It was a baby tooth, thankfully, but according to his mom, it was not loose. He just sat at his desk, grabbed the tooth, yanked it back and forth until it popped out, and then came up to the desk bleeding all over himself. He said he couldn't read anymore and asked if he could just put his head down. He was sent to the nurse, and his mom was horrified. On my first day of teaching ever, a kid in my class carved a girl's name into his leg and bled everywhere. A month later, in that same class, a different student stole my wallet and later returned it to me when I was alone in a hall after school. When he gave it back, he calmly told me I should be aware of what he could do to me since he had been able to steal from me without my noticing. I never reported him for that, but shortly after, his parents pulled him out of our school because they thought we were too liberal and filling their God godly son with bad ideas. I was a supervisor for a special program that involved about 20 students who had been expelled from other schools. Most of them were known gang members. The program had a strict no-bandana policy. One day, Kid 1, M16, stole Kid 2's M17 cigarettes while Kid 2 was in an office session about his homework. We later found out that Kid 1 thought it was hilarious and was laughing about it. During break, Kid 2 went for his smokes and couldn't find them. He proceeded to flip out, screaming about how he was going to hurt someone. No one admitted to the theft. We de-escalated the situation and later took him to the store to buy a new pack. A few days later, Kid 1 was ratted out by another student who was in the same gang as Kid 2. We didn't know any of this was going on at the time. One afternoon, during a group session where the students sat in a circle instead of at desks, Kid 2 and another boy suddenly jumped up and yelled, "Yo, Kid 1!" as they ran at him and started beating him up right in front of everyone. The staff broke up the fight. All 3 students were expelled after that incident. I have no idea what happened to them afterward, although I can imagine some scenarios based on how committed they were to gang life. I'm a middle school teacher, so I've got some stories, but this one from this fall is quite scary. During class, as we were getting new assigned seats and the students were waiting at the front of the classroom while I read out names and seats, a girl, who was pretty quiet but not exactly a loner, stabbed a boy in the back with a pair of scissors completely unprovoked. She jabbed him deep enough to puncture a lung, and somehow this kid didn't notice. It wasn't until 15 minutes later, when he asked to use the restroom, that another teacher saw his back soaked in blood. We figured out what happened and who did it. The police were called, and she was taken to a children's facility. At the end of the day, I stopped in to chat with the principal about the incident, and what the principal described was quite disturbing. The girl apparently sat there the entire time the police were talking to her about what she did and why she did it, and she showed absolutely no remorse. She sat there and nodded with no tears, and gave no reason for her actions. When she was told she would be going into a children's facility, she had no reaction, just sat there staring. This wasn't revenge for something the boy did. They weren't friends, and he's the sweetest kid who enjoys his small group of friends and Pokemon. She did this completely randomly. I caught a student trying to take inappropriate photos of his female classmates. When I noticed him doing something suspicious, directly aiming his camera at the female students, I told him to hand over his phone. He got visibly uncomfortable, but complied. I handed the phone to his form tutor, who was a lady, and explained the situation. I figured if there were any photos of female students, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to see them. The first sweep through his documents didn't reveal anything, but I suggested she check the hidden category, and everything was in there. The school took disciplinary action as a result. I am a special education teacher, and during my student teaching, I had a lovely 16-year-old girl with Down syndrome. She was a quiet, reserved girl who often was not well groomed. This is something that we worked on with her at school. She was gaining weight and tired a lot, and was discovered that she had not had a period for several months. The school nurse examined her and realized she was nearly 6 months pregnant. After an investigation, her younger brother, 11 years old, was having sex with her and got her pregnant. I believe he went to a juvenile center. I moved out of the country, so I'm not sure whatever happened to her. I do know she gave birth and the baby was adopted. I always think about that girl often. I taught preschool for a couple of years and had a 3-year-old in my class who was new to the school. He was cute as a button, with perfect blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and rosy red cheeks. However, he was a nightmare. He would randomly get up and run around the room, smacking other kids in the face. One time, he came over and tried to punch me and my co-teacher in the stomach. I was able to stop him and put him in a hold that we were taught at the preschool. His parents acted like nothing was wrong and refused to see that their child had serious issues. The final straw was one day during crafts. He was playing at a different center in the classroom when he got up and ran towards a little girl I was helping. She had her back turned to him, and he grabbed a triangle-shaped building magnet and stabbed her in the neck so hard it cut her. I've never reacted so quickly. I grabbed him from behind by his arms and immediately walked him to the hallway and down to the main office. I was done. I told my director that he was either out of my class today or I quit. His parents withdrew him that day before we could start the process of expulsion. My director still got him on a list that stays on his school record, indicating these outbursts. I don't know what happened to him, but I'm sure I'll see him on the news someday. I also worked with another group of 5 underage siblings at the first school board who were all HIV positive, but it was their legal right to have their medical status kept private. The siblings would regularly threaten other students, hit them, fight them, etc. And yes, other students' skin was broken and blood potentially exchanged on occasion. I had to tell the parents to treat their injured kids as if they had potentially eventually contracted any number of unknown viruses or bacteria, as per the school board administration rules. I had a third-grade student who would draw really graphic pictures of himself killing people. He would happily tell us that he was going to watch his dad murder his mom, then he would kill his dad, and finally kill himself. We brought our concerns to the administration and his mom. However, everyone just treated it like a joke. His mom would laugh and say, "Oh, he tells me that too, but no guns until he's 18. Eventually, and thankfully, this kid ended up being hospitalized. I've taught some university courses on occasion. One student comes to mind immediately. She was in a class of mine that was on an accelerated, condensed schedule. As such, an absence of more than half a class period meant you couldn't pass due to mandated attendance percentages. She was very late a few times. I let it slide since she was fairly intelligent and normally caught up quickly. However, we had a chat about how important it was for her to arrive on time. Finally, she didn't show up at all for 3 class periods. There was no way she could pass the class due to her absences, and she had missed enough content to be far behind. After that, she came in and sat down like normal. I didn't try to help her catch up since she didn't speak to me or ask for assistance. When the term was over, she came in one day while I was with another group, wanting to know why she failed. I pointed out her attendance issues and the content she missed, plus the fact that she blew the final. She started giving me excuses about her car breaking down and so on. She could have emailed or called, but didn't. Then she started screaming at me that I was ruining her life and preventing her from graduating. When I pointed out that I had been very clear about the requirements and that she had made zero effort to work with me, she literally stepped forward and pulled her fist back, ready to hit me. She made one last demand, which I refused. By that time, someone walking by, I had stepped out of the classroom, saw her actions and asked if there was a problem. I wasn't concerned. I'm a pretty solid guy and she was a smaller woman. She simply wouldn't take any responsibility for her actions. She eventually wrote to everyone at my school trying to get around me or get me into trouble, but it didn't work. I had complete support from the administration. I work at a girls' middle school in a very rough neighborhood. My students often gang up on specific girls from other grades. My 7th graders broke a girl's leg and another girl's arm at different points during the year. One girl tried to stab a teacher in the eye with a sharpened pencil. She went to the trash can specifically to sharpen her pencil before running towards the teacher. I have a student who bleeds every week because she likes stabbing herself with pens, pencils, staples, and pins. As a result, that class isn't allowed to have things pinned or stapled on the corkboards anymore. I've had random moments during class where girls will just start punching each other, and I'll have to get in between them. I've only been teaching for a year, and I'm already very exhausted. We had a brother and sister that were adopted at birth from Russia. These kids were trouble. Needless to say, times were often difficult, and one of them seemed to have extremely sociopathic tendencies. For Christmas, they got a camera. Seemed like a fun gift idea, and they were really excited about it. I knew their family didn't have much in the way of income, so a cool gift was really special for them. I was happy they got something they both enjoyed so much. But then they brought the camera in and began showing other children the pictures, which is a pretty big no-no. Not allowed to bring in cameras to school or anything. The pictures were some of the most explicit images I've ever seen. They were essentially photographing one another's buttholes as they spread their cheeks apart, among other things. Talking about the photo shoot and how they had to do it when mom and dad weren't watching. It was never overtly sexual, more just them thinking they were being funny. What's your wildest teacher experience? Let us know in the comments. You've been listening to Spill the Tea, a Reddit podcast. When you subscribe, make sure to turn on the bell to turn on notifications and put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. We've put the playlist link in the description.